Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Live Stream Lee. I'm Lee Thurburn and I'm your host. And we're going to have a very interesting conversation today. One that I am extremely both interested in and concerned about. And I'm hoping to be able to convey the reasons for my concern to you. Before we do that, I want to say thank you to two people that help support this. One is a guy named Dan Nelson. Dan is a genealogist and an incredibly good storyteller. He's a master storyteller. Dan does genealogy. Of course, that means that he does research into people's family histories, and he actually prepares beautifully crafted books that you can have as a memento or basically, to cover your family's history when he finishes the research. But here's what I think you're going to find interesting. Now, if you need genealogy, Dan's your man. But if you just like history, Dan does a newsletter every 2 weeks, and you can sign up to get on his newsletter. It's free. But every 2 weeks, I get this wonderful newsletter in my email on a Saturday morning. And it is just a delight to read. It is so much fun. And he always uncovers these really interesting facts about different things. And it's just really interesting stuff. If you're a history buff like me, you're going to love his newsletter. Go to livestreamlee.com, click on the Dan Nelson link, sign up for his newsletter. Okay, the other guy I want to tell you about is Bob Hampton. Bob is a financial planner and a retirement planner. And he's also a CPA, and he focuses his practice on helping business owners make sure that when the day comes for them to get out of the business that they've started, to liquidate, to sell, whatever it is that it means to, finalize the business and move on to the next stage of your life, whatever that is. It might be another business. But there's tremendous tax implications, especially if you sell your business. And there's a lot of different ways that you can structure that sale, many of which will dramatically lower your tax liability. If you are reaching the point where you're starting to think about the end game, I, again, want to recommend you go to livestreamlee.com and click on the Bob Hampton link. You'll see it there, and that'll take you to Bob's website where you can get in touch with Bob. He has a newsletter also. He has a podcast. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with Bob. You'll find Bob to be just a really cool guy and filled with knowledge. So if you don't have somebody in your corner that is a specialist in the business liquidation and tax planning aspects of business, transfers, you need to know Bob. So go do that. All right. So today we're going to be talking about China. And I am going to add this to the stream. I've got a PowerPoint I'm going to present to you. I'm hoping I can make it interesting. I know PowerPoints can be really boring, but I want to give you a sequence of basically information that I think is critically important for all of us to understand. I am in the camp that believes that China is our biggest existential threat, and that we need to be prepared for a future war with China. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you a sequence of fundamentally, economic principles, I guess, fundamental economic principles that are driving the conflict that is coming with China. Now, the first is, and I'm actually going to drill a little bit deeper into this as we go through a sequence of slides, but I'm going to talk to you about a rapidly escalating, sort of top-heavy demographic profile. China's population is aging rapidly, and they don't have a younger population coming along that's sufficient in size to support the aging population. They have a housing crisis, which is basically an incredible bubble, which is about to burst. And there are tremendous ramifications of this to wealth aggregation and retirement funding here in the United States and the rest of the Western world. As a nation, they're suffering intense water shortages which have really already reached catastrophic levels, but have not quite yet shown up in economic sort of collapse, if you will. The Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has recently begun a series of very heavy-handed crackdowns on various economic sectors, and there are reasons for why they're doing that. It's really partly driven by the ego of Xi Jinping, who is the top dog over there. He's the premier. And they have a generalized slowing of their economy that is currently occurring, that is putting tremendous strain on all of their public services, especially their ability to take care of the elderly. And this represents an incredible, imminent threat within China, internal to China, to their social stability. So I'm going to go through each of these things a little bit greater detail. Now, there is an incredible YouTube resource I want you to know about. And I'm going to draw from this YouTube resource. It's somebody named Polymatter. And this Polymatter person or group, I'm not sure, they're a little bit ambiguous or anonymous. You can't really know who the person is. But they've published 4 different incredibly detailed statistical analyses of various aspects of China's economic situation. I've got the link here, and I'm going to just say, go to YouTube, type Polymatter China, and you're going to find the 4 documents that I'm referencing. But the first one that they go through is the demographic collapse. And you see two graphics down here at the bottom of the screen, and they tell a story of what the impact of the one-child policy has had on the China labor supply. As you can see, the slide on the left is, or the graphic on the left is China's current demographic segment profile by age group. And on the right, it's what it'll look like 20 years from now. And the critically important pieces to notice are in basically the lower half. Right now, the lower half of the demographic stack is thick. This is where the most productive people in any population are. The population between about 20 and 60 years of age. And that's where the big yellow segment is. Now, as 20 years from now, as those people age out into the elderly segment, which becomes the sort of the bluish green on the right-hand slide, you'll see that the number of people to replace them in the workforce is dramatically less. And what that ends up making is a top-heavy situation where you don't have enough people coming along for the future to support the economic needs of the generations that went ahead of them. And so there's some additional sort of impacts here, but basically in 20 years, they're going to have an incredibly difficult time generating enough revenue in their economy, basically enough wealth in their economy to support the elderly population. That's going to put a lot of social stress on the Chinese government and the Chinese, basically the Chinese life system. They have a problem that many other countries don't have, which is immigration. They can't immigrate people for a couple of reasons. Number one, a lot of people don't want to immigrate to China. Number two, China is very racist and ethnocentric. And the Chinese language is extremely difficult to learn. So for all of these reasons, there's really a limit to how much of the population that they're going to need that they can replace by having immigration come in. The United States, on the other hand, has a much different situation when it comes to immigration. But China has a big problem. So you have this burgeoning, impending demographic collapse, which is really kind of headed full steam ahead to China. The next is a housing crisis. This is another one of the Polymatter episodes. And the housing crisis basically is driven by a couple of things. China's one-child policy has literally caused about a 52 to 48% bias towards men in the Chinese population. There are enough additional men and a shortage of women such that not all guys, not all young men are going to be able to find a wife. So what happens? Well, some of them will go into the military. Some of them just end up being bachelors the rest of their life. I mean, all that. But there's an oversupply of males And the only way that a male can compete for a wife is to own property. And there's really not any reasonable alternative to real estate in the Chinese economy for people to put their money, because China is not a country that you can trust their economic system. And that means their stock market, while they have a burgeoning stock market, it is subject to the whims of the Chinese government. And this has been recently exhibited by a number of different heavy-handed crackdowns that China has made. Even Jack Ma, the wealthiest individual in China, he's like Jeff Bezos. He runs a company called Alibaba. He's basically disappeared because he actually was brazen enough to criticize the Chinese government. And even though he was like the Jeff Bezos in China, the Chinese Communist Party, who knows what's happened to him? I mean, they may have put him in prison. They may have killed him. I mean, we just don't know. So my point is that if you're investing in Chinese stocks, you really have no security for your investment, because they can be wiped out instantaneously. Now, real estate has been the only thing that's really been a good, safe place for the Chinese population to put their money. And as a result, the share of the Chinese wealth, the GDP related to real estate, as you can see on this chart on the right, is significantly greater than it is for any other country. And I actually don't know if I can see let's see here. Yeah, this is China is basically 30% of their wealth is created in their nation through real estate investment and real estate related activities. Well, there's a number of things that cause this. First of all, the only way, because China doesn't have income taxes and sales taxes and things like that, the only way Chinese cities and provincial municipalities and things like that can generate revenue is to lease land that is owned by the Chinese government. So it's owned by the states or the counties or whatever you want to call them. They can lease land for 99 years that builders can build on. And by leasing the land and getting a percent, selling the land basically to builders long term, and then getting a percentage of the sale price on properties, that's how Chinese municipalities fund their local services. They don't get any money from the federal government, from the Chinese government, because the Chinese government doesn't get any money. They don't have the same kind of tax system, revenue generated system that the United States does. And so one of the major drivers in the Chinese economy is construction. And so here's what happens. This chart on the left, you can see that first home purchases, pretty much everybody in China that wants a home has bought one. So first home purchases have now declined to around 10-12% of all purchases. Second home purchases have now declined to where they're still the largest number of purchases, and third home purchases are coming into play. What does that mean? Well, that means, there's a tremendous number of people in China that own not only one home, but two homes and even three homes. And there are actually over 50 million homes in China, 50 million homes that have been purchased that do not have anybody living in them, because people are just buying property because they've got to put their money somewhere where they can help it to grow, make it grow. Now, as you probably know, there's a lot of Chinese using monies that they've earned or from real estate investments in China, which has an exorbitant real estate market. Prices are just outrageous. They bring them over to the United States and they buy property here, and they do it for a whole variety of reasons. But the point is that there are 50 million homes that are not lived in. Well, if you figure the average home has three people in it, husband, wife, and a kid, that's 50 times 3, 150 million people that could live in those homes. Well, China has 1.4 million, 10% of the basically there's a 10% oversupply of homes in the nation of China, that relative to the number of homes they need. Now, in any normalized economy that is market-based, that would be a tremendous oversupply of homes. But in China, they keep building them because they don't have any way to not do that. And this is building an incredible debt crisis, which is a real estate bubble with an associated debt crisis, which is something we need to keep in mind. Now, the next thing, and this is another one of Polymatter's episodes, the next thing is the water crisis. And China has an incredible crisis going on relative to water. In the last 20 years, over 28,000 rivers have disappeared. The Yellow River is running at only 10% of the volume that it did back in the 1940s. China is actually suffering water shortages at the same level that Saudi Arabia is. It is literally a threat to the survival of their nation. Now, China is generally north-south divided horizontally by the Yellow River. And in the south, it is subtropical, and in the north, it is temperate. And the problem is that the majority of the water in China really, rain goes into the southern, so they have to reroute water to the north. So what they're doing is they're doing incredibly expensive water movement processes, putting in big viaducts and aqueducts and air ducts and all that kind of stuff in to move water from the south to the north. They're investing $100 billion to build water transfer project in the far western part of China to move water from the south to the north. But all this does is spread the water around. It doesn't create any new water. And in fact, it can cause water shortages in areas that previously had water. So, it's left pocket, right pocket, robbing Peter to pay Paul. The problem is that there is a simple solution, which is market-based rationing of water based upon cost. But the problem is that for China to implement a market-based rationing solution, basically to adjust the price of the water, which would have a tremendous water-saving impact because water is very irresponsibly utilized in China. The problem, if they did that, they would be basically admitting that one of the fundamental principles of the Chinese party is wrong and is flawed. So they're not going to do that. And so they're going to have a water shortage problem that's going to really make have a big detrimental impact on China's economic growth in the future. In fact, you can see the water shortage levels here. Tianjin province, the average number of cubic meters of water per person on an annualized basis is 122 cubic meters of water. Normal is considered 1,500 cubic meters of water. When you're at the 122 cubic meters of water, fresh water per person, you're literally in the same realm as Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. It is literally a desert, and it's going to impact China's ability to grow their economy in the near future. Now, the fourth episode that Polymatter goes into starts to really impact on this whole war thing we're going to be talking about. And that is China's national insecurity. You may very well have noticed over the last several years an increasing level of belligerence, aggressive behavior on behalf of China. And there's a lot of things going on that cause that. First of all, China has a very sort of racist and narcissistic, nationally narcissistic perspective because of their cultural bias. They kind of think that they're the most civilized nation on earth, and they aside from that they have a very ethnocentric perspective of the world. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has one major lever for controlling the population, and that is nationalism. Now, the nationalism is an interesting thing. China is actually in a situation where their economy is going through a gradual but accelerating period of economic collapse. In large part, this is due to the real estate crisis. They're continuing to build real estate that nobody's living in. Nobody's really, the fact is that they've built all the homes they need to build. They don't need to build anymore. They don't have a population. Even though they have 1.5 billion people, they have 10% more homes than they need. So how long can you continue to simply build homes, buildings, and offices and freeways for people that aren't there? You just know that at some point in time, there's going to be a collapse. Well, with the COVID and the slowing down of the global economy as well as the Chinese economy, there has been problems with China being able to support the debt. And so at some point, they're going to really end up having a problem. Now, in preparation for that, now that we've reached the 100-year anniversary of the Communist Chinese Party, and the current leader Xi Jinping is really he's really a piece of work. He's a very, I would use words like megalomaniac and certainly dictatorial in his heavy-handed approach to running the Chinese Communist Party. And he's really consolidated his power, and he's been cracking down on various economic and social sectors. Recently, he's basically squashed all what he calls girly boy type of entertainment. He's trying to eliminate the Western influence. He's trying to, in a heavy-handed fashion, basically restrict creativity of the entertainment culture or segments of their culture. Personally, my point on this is that in related to the stock market and related to social liberties and related to entertainment, China is ratcheting down, and they're not moving towards a more open and progressive society, which everybody kind of thought would happen with the internet and all that kind of stuff. They're actually taking the exact reverse course. And it's interesting that if you look from the 10-year period from 2007 to 2018, the defense budget in China tripled. It grew by 300%. The internal security budget grew by 400%. It went up by 4 times. China's security issues are really not externally threatening. I mean, let's face it, we all know the United States really has no interest in trying to harm China. But the Chinese government is using the United States, and this is a critical thing we're going to get to in just a second, is using the United States as a boogeyman to frighten the Chinese people. Frighten. Boy, don't you know that governments love to use frightening language? We see it happening here in our country as well. But the next person from YouTube that I really want to encourage you to go take time to get to know is somebody named Serpent. Actually, there's a T in here, Serpenza. Let me go ahead and put the T, Serpenza. And he recently published something that was under the moniker China Declares War. I've got a link in here if you want to go look at it, but go find Serpenza and just type China Declares War. And he has a Chinese document. There's a link here to it. It's the China National News. So it's a China News document. This is the official publicity arm of the Chinese government. If it's in the China News, it's the government's permission. The government's saying this. And you can actually copy. You can go to this document and you can copy the Chinese language. You can go to Google and you can plug in all those strange looking Chinese characters into the Google translator, and they'll actually translate a very accurate conversion to English of what this document says. I'm going to just give you the short end of it. The last paragraph says, and this is the China government talking to the people. It is warning the population that the U.S. is actively engaging in economic, cultural, military, and virological attacks on China, and that the U.S. is an active enemy of China. And it is telling people, be aware, changes are coming. It is alerting the population to the danger that the United States presents to China, and it is telling them to prepare for dangerous times. I think you can read between the lines, and basically this is China banging the drums of war to prepare their population psychologically for an impending war with the United States. And I will submit, I think we're already at war. It's just we're not using, kinetic weapons of any sort. So why is China so belligerent, and why is this level of belligerence increasing? Well, again, China is a culturally ingrained sense of racial superiority. The population is aging rapidly and is top heavy, and they can see the writing on the wall. They're not going to be able to support their future population growth. And right now is a period of relative strength that may not last much longer. They have a real estate market bubble, a debt crisis of their own that is about to burst. They have water shortages and polluted water. It's just incredible when you dig into the numbers. Please go look at the Polymatter data. Um, the solution to all of these basic problems is there for them. There are solutions that China could implement, but the solutions all require normalization of market conditions, the implementation of a complete capitalistic sort of resource allocation fundamental approach. And that means that the Chinese Communist Party basically has to go away. And you know they're not going to do that. So they do what governments tend to do is they turn towards the use of fear and hatred, pointed at the United States in particular and the West in general, as the most simple solution. Now, the problem with this is potentially this leads to actual war. So while they're drumming up the nationalistic sort of fervor in the Chinese population, the problem is that it could actually lead to war. So there are some very specific near-term alarming conditions. Right now, the Communist Chinese Party has a strong grip on China. That may not last a much longer time. We don't know. I mean, certainly probably going to be at least a couple of years, but is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 20 years? I don't know. China knows that they've got severe social disruption coming from all of these problems if they don't solve them. And I don't think that they're going to be able to solve them. And so they're turning towards the alternative solution of beating the drums of war. China has a really large population that has studied abroad. And while many of those people have, basically come over here to try to, just get an education and take it back and benefit China, the reality is many of them are over here. And when they were over here, while they're still here now, they know that the United States is not a real threat. So they go back and they have this personal knowledge of what the United States is like and the Western world is like. And they know we're not a bunch of warmongers trying to, corral China and do damage to China. So they're going to go back and they're going to be somewhat inoculated against the Chinese Communist Party propaganda. There's a real chance that the Chinese Communist Party could lose control of the population. The housing, water, and economic crises could all make it be so aggravated. Unemployment could rise, social discontent could rise. And they saw what happened with Russia, how the people basically rose up and disassembled or ran out the Communist Party. So they're concerned about that happening there too. And they're going to use heavy-handed means to prevent that from happening. So war and nationalism are great tools to be able to maintain control over a population. And here's the fact. The current U.S. administration is weak. There's no doubt about it. There's no arguing about it. Our cowardly approach to Afghanistan has done nothing but make China and the rest of the world wonder about the stamina and the willingness of the current U.S. administration to be able to stand up to difficult and challenging situations. Now, our military isn't weak, but our leadership is weak. And I'm real concerned personally about prospects for the midterm. If China sees that it is becoming likely that a strong Republican, maybe even Trump, who knows, comes back into office and there's a resurgence of willpower and strong leadership in the United States, China may decide that the time that is the best time to be able to take an aggressive action that could potentially miscalculatingly lead to war, that they could miscalculate our determination as a nation and do something stupid that leads to war. So I think that while we have these tremendous conservative versus liberal things going on in the United States, the Democratic versus the Republican Party, when the elections start to get closer and they see if they see that the Republicans are going to be regaining control of the House and the Senate, and if they see the Republicans are going to be regaining control of the presidency, they may very well decide that they need to take advantage of a period of time where there's real weakness. I think this even becomes potentially a greater threat if Biden is removed from office for any number of reasons that this could happen, and Kamala Harris comes in, because I think the perception of Kamala Harris as being a stalwart champion of freedom in the world is pretty thin. In other words, I don't personally see her as being better than Biden in terms of willingness to stand up to China. And so, depending upon some variables, we could have an incredibly risky time frame coming up here that China might try to take advantage of. So that's my big concern. So how would they do this? Where would the war start? Well, it's probably going to be either Taiwan, the South China Sea, or Japan or India. Now, it's much more likely to be based on Taiwan or the South China Sea. And I think most people understand that, China wants Taiwan to be brought back into the mainland fold. Taiwan doesn't want that to happen. Taiwan has a reasonably effective military, though much smaller than China, and probably no way that they could stand up to China's attempt to take Taiwan by force without the help of the United States. Well, the United States, of course, has treaties with Japan and the Philippines and Australia and India, and none of them want to see China own Taiwan. So there's a real flashpoint there. And then, of course, there's a flashpoint in the South China Sea with the Spratly Islands and everything that China is doing there. China's belligerence is beginning to be even greater. China is actually sending military ships into the economic zone of the United States near the Aleutian Islands as a tit for tat response to the United States sending freedom of navigation sorties through the South China Sea area. And China has built their military up to be a pretty significant military, still no match to the United States, but they are closer to home than we would be if we had to go over there. So it's not an insignificant military buildup. So where is it going to be? It's probably either going to be that the flash would occur, if one does occur, in Taiwan or the South China Sea. So when would war be most likely? Well, again, the ideal time from a Chinese perspective would be when they sense that they're at a peak of differential between the United States military, economic, and leadership strength and their military, economic, and leadership strength. If they sense that our position of strength relative to theirs is going to close whatever gap they see, then their window of opportunity starts to shrink rapidly. And so depending upon how the elections play out in the midterms and towards the 2024 presidential elections, they may very well see this next 3 years or so as a window of opportunity that'll never present itself again. Now, you couple that window of opportunity with the impending collapse in so many areas of the China miracle, the economic miracle that China has had happening. And if those two things come together in such a fashion that China's leadership can't see a solid confidence that they're going to be able to maintain control long term, they may think that they need to take advantage of this short-term window of differential military strength and leadership strength. That's the big one, leadership strength. Military power is nothing if you don't have leadership. And so if they think that there's an opportunity, that may very well be the point in time when they decide to act. So what can we do? This is really the big question. What can we do? Well, first, write and alert your elected representatives to what you perceive to be an imminent danger. That's one thing. Now, progressively more important and potentially impactful. First of all, stop buying stuff from China. Start looking to make sure that when you make purchases, if you can possibly avoid it, pay more and buy it from the United States, or buy it from the United States, one of our trading partners, the Philippines, Germany, England, India. Buy it from anywhere other than China. When we buy stuff from China, we're supporting China's economy, we're supporting the Chinese Communist Party. And so we need to change our purchasing patterns, either buy from the United States or buy from made in Germany, made in France, made in Mexico. I mean, anywhere but China. Realize that we are already at war. China is attacking us on a daily basis with cyber attacks. And, we're already at war. We're economically in a life or death struggle with China right now. We need to strengthen our military, and we need to make especially big investments in space. That's the high ground. We need to make sure that China does not become dominant in space. And they are making a concerted effort to increase their space capabilities. And that is really important to us. So we need to make sure that that part of our military is extremely strong in addition to the rest. We need to strengthen our alliances. We need to strengthen our leadership. We need to strengthen our resolve as a nation. As a nation, we need to understand that we are at war and that it is, in fact, an existential crisis. And by that I mean it could be a crisis of such severe proportions that our nation's very livelihood and life could be threatened by China. Place restrictions on access to U.S. educational institutions. We need to quit educating the leadership of China in the military, in the economic and industrial techniques and technologies that are allowing them to become a competitive threat with us. We need to close that down. We need to put restrictions on Chinese ownership of property in the United States and implement strategic laws against businesses doing business with and in China. Do not allow access to the United States capital markets for Chinese companies. Do not allow U.S. companies to do business with China. I know that's not going to be very popular, but I'm going to tell you, if war breaks out, that's going to happen anyway. And how do we prevent war? By just going ahead and battening down our hatches. Sanction people and companies that are doing business with China. Make it tough economically. Tax them heavier. Cause it to be a difficult choice for people to do business with China. In short, again, we're facing an existential threat. What can we do? Well, the big thing is we want to make sure that we don't get into an actual shooting war. China doesn't have nearly as many nukes as we do or delivery systems as we do, but they have enough, and they could really hurt not only the United States, but the world at large. And we don't want to get into a shooting conflict with China if we can avoid it. So how do we do that? Well, treat China like the existential threat that it is. Try to do anything that we can do to collapse the Chinese Communist Party. That needs to go away. The Chinese Communist Party, not the people, the party is the threat. The people don't have access to free information. Heck, here in the United States, that's even becoming a challenge. But compared to China, we have total access to free information. The Chinese people are seeing a one-sided view of the world. They don't know anything but what the government tells them. Their internet is controlled. Their news is controlled. They have no access to information. So we don't have a beef with the Chinese people. They're a brilliant, industrious, proud people. And there's nothing, I mean, the Chinese people, I mean, no problem. But the government, the Communist Party needs to go. We need, as a nation, as people, as individuals, to do everything we can to rip the rug out from under China economically. If we can take the economic foundation of the Chinese Communist Party out from under them, which we can do, we did it to Russia. We beat Russia economically, and we can beat China economically. Even though they're large, they're not invincible. One of the reasons they're so bellicose and belligerent and bullying is because they're trying to puff themselves up and make them seem like they're invincible. It's as much a show for the people inside their nation as it is for the rest of the world. Economically, we can beat China without having to fire a bullet. But to do that, we have to realize that China is, in fact, an existential threat to our nation. There you go. I went a little over today, about 8 minutes over. I hope you found this interesting. And I certainly look forward to hearing any comments that you might have. Let me go ahead and remove this and bring myself back. All of the opinions I've put forth, of course, are mine. But I got to tell you, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the world, you're probably nervous. I know I am. And I'm especially nervous in the next 3 years while the Biden presidency plays itself out, because we've never had a more weak political leadership than we do now. And that is something that our adversaries, and when I say adversaries, I'm really pointing the finger at China more than anything else. Our adversaries will take advantage of weakness if they sense it and they think they can get away with it. So do those things I listed. And if you have any, I'd love to hear from you. Okay, I'll be back on Friday with something else. Thank you for watching Live Stream Lee. Until Friday, adios.